So as we continue on in track 2 today, we're just a little bit ahead of schedule, but the learning is going to continue. We're going to stay in the grants and funding and federal, state, local partnership thought set. And I think a lot of folks are going to be compelled by this topic. Peeling back the layers of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, IIJA, or some people call it BIL, the big infrastructure law. It takes a lot of work to put one of these laws and the implementation together. And then on the applicant side, I can speak from personal experience. It takes a lot of work to understand how to walk up to this and pick out opportunities and pursue applications. So I think John Molnar, you're going to moderate this. So I'm going to turn it over to you to tell a little bit more about what we're going to experience in this next hour. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. I just wanted to make sure Steve and Meredith, are you on board?
I am. Can you hear me, John? It's
I
not
hear you
allowing.
fine. Yep.
It's not allowing me to start the video, though. It's saying that the host. Oh, there it is. I'm on.
All right. Yeah, give me 2 seconds here, Steve, and we'll be working forward. Hi, everyone. My name is John Molnar, and I am the director of the Program Management Office here at the AHC. And besides working on the various emergency management projects within AHC across states, academia, and in industry, one of the areas that the AHC has been engaged in is the mitigation area. And we just talked here for the last hour regarding the BRIC grants and the mobile energy storage. You know, these types of projects we've been working on. One of the in the meantime, though, we kept hearing about the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and we heard about all the money, and we heard about everything that was moving forward. And as someone that was ignorant on this subject, I have to be honest, I only thought that it was really about fixing roads and bridges. And so the AHC really wasn't engaged. They weren't looking at this. And we started seeing in discussions with Steve and Meredith that, you know, this act was much more broader than what you first see on the forefront. You know, first of all, with the $1.2 trillion that they have invested, I think it brings some bring some eyeballs onto this thing. And I guess there's 550 billion that has been earmarked over the next 5 years. And it is certainly much more than just roads and bridges. You know, and we're talking to Steve, we're talking about reconstruction projects, we're talking about recyclable projects, we're talking about agriculture. And I never envisioned any of this. It really was up to the innovation of the players that were going to provide the applications. That was, you know, that was up to them in regards to being innovative or not. And what is so, I think, applicable within this environment is everyone can apply. If I'm hearing this right, Steve and Meredith, you can correct me if I'm off base here. But I mean, academia can apply, industry can apply, state and local groups and organizations can apply. I mean, this is as broad can be. You know, the key is that, you know, where do I go to apply? What do I have to do to apply? What are the mechanisms that you have to achieve to get the applications to be scored properly? You know, what are all these questions? So to be honest, we brought in a team here, you know, Steve Kroll and Meredith Jones. I'll talk to that in a second, and their team from Aptum. Aptum is a 40,000 employee company with experience in mitigation area, consisting of engineering, program management, grants management, disaster services. So it's fairly broad. And Steve and Meredith have been working on the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act for the last 2 years. So they really have been on the ground floor in this area and have and are really, plowing the fields, as we say, to understand what's going on, where are the opportunities here, and what do you need to do to get that done. Just in regards to Steve Kroll, Steve has been a friend of the AHC. I have to say, Steve, this has gone on for 16 years now. So I don't know if that just means we're old or whatever,
It
but
does.
yeah. So Steve, we've known Steve since his days at the Senior Policy Advisor at IIJA back in 2006, 2007. He's worked at the Homeland Security Government Relations Office at WMATA. And for the past 10 years, on the consulting side, he's worked in emergency management, public safety, and recovery management. Meredith is a manager working at Aptum as again, in program management roles in the recovery area, specifically in some cases, construction management for over 10 years. And what is critical is that she is a member of Aptum's core leadership team, spearheading operational alignment with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. So with that, I'll leave you guys to it and leave the experts here to the microphone versus me rambling on here. So Steve and Meredith, you can, Steve, I guess you're going to share your screen and your presentation.
Yeah, I will do that.
Okay, it's all yours, guys.
And let me know when you could see my screen.
Yep, it's good, Steve. Can we just go into presentation mode? So the full
Sure.
screen. Perfect. Yep.
There we go.
Should pop up here in just a minute.
Is it just in the presentation mode?
Oh, just in the regular PowerPoint format. Yeah, let's try that one again.
There we go.
Yeah, Steve, we've had issues with this trying to go into the presentation mode. I don't know if that's a Teams thing or whatever, but we see the screen fine. Let's just continue on. Yep.
Yeah. Well, and thank you, John, for that lovely introduction. You probably stole half of what I was going to say, so even better. Great minds think alike. But welcome, everybody. Steve and I are excited to chat with you today. As John mentioned a little bit about Aptum, nationwide work from commercial and industrial clients to state and local clients to energy clients, utilities, oil and gas. And these are just some of the core services we provide to these types of clients really across the board and across the nation. So our work in environmental is not limited purely to environmental type companies. We'll do environmental work for commercial companies and private companies and vice versa. So it's our breadth and experience really is broad and expands across the nation and across the industry. So we're excited to chat with you all today and just dive into Infrastructure Jobs Act a little bit more. So with that, as John mentioned, there is a lot of money. And I think when it first passed in November 2021, everyone kept seeing this large number. It was very exciting, but there wasn't a lot of detail defined to it, and there was not a lot of clear direction. So starting to peel back the layers to get a little bit more understanding. And I'm a visual person. I think Steve is also very much a visual person. So we created this graphic to help break it down a little bit. So of the $1.2 trillion, 550 are going to new programs. On the previous call, you guys were chatting about the BRIC, right? That's an existing program. 650 billion is going to new programs that the federal state agencies are creating. So we're kind of splitting it up into these two buckets, new programs and existing programs. And then within that 550 of existing programs, you see it broken down there, as John was mentioning, to, bridges, roadways, infrastructure, but it's really more beyond just that as well. We've got electric vehicles, we've got waste minimization, we've got telecom, communications for increasing Wi-Fi and connectivity in rural counties. We've got agriculture. So we've got a lot of sub pieces to this that are new. And then of that existing 650 billion, that's all going to new programs. Those are new programs that federal agencies are just starting to create right now. And even Steve and I are staying updated on, as these new programs are created, what are the rules, what are the details, what are the funding obligations, the timelines. So there's still a lot of work as folks are figuring out where some of this money is going. But at least with the 550 existing, we know those existing programs like BRIC, CDBGR, FEMA, et cetera. So we'll dive into that in a little bit more detail. And Steve, we can jump to the next slide, please. And so this is another visual that kind of breaks down that existing 550 of existing programs. So as you can see, roads and bridges, like John mentioned, are kind of one of the bigger components there. But we've got, even some of those smaller components, EV charging, buses, fleets. As John mentioned, schools. You could get creative and start thinking about schools with buses and electrifying those buses for public school districts, for elementary schools. So there's a lot of different components to this. We've put some links here on the left of sources that were really good at starting to consolidate all the information and kind of put it into a clear, concise format. Obviously, if you want to read the more than 2,000 page infrastructure bill, everyone's by all means welcome to read that, but that definitely does not, that can sometimes put people to bed pretty quickly. But these sources here, these links, really help do a good job of creating the cliff notes and breaking it down into really digestible, easy to read and understand pieces. So that's kind of a very high level intro of some of this money, where it's going, but I'll pass it over to Steve and kind of dive into a little bit about what Optum does with it, and then some examples we can provide.
Sure, and thank you, Meredith, and thank you everybody for allowing us to speak with you today. I see a lot of old friends on the participant list, and really appreciate your time to talk to you about the infrastructure bill. There has to be a process, and Optum here has a particular approach that we follow in order to help identify those particular opportunities out there for our clients. So the first thing we'll do is we need to identify the need of the client. And what I'd like to do, and I've done this at the local level, and I'm also doing it at a utilities level for the Port Authority and also some electrical utilities, I dive into their capital budgets. And I have to identify there in the capital budgets where there are the 1 year, the 3 year, the 5 year, even sometimes that 10-year project out there that has a gap in funding, right? And in turn, you see those gaps in funding with, normal day-to-day understanding how to get cost shares for particular opportunities in grants. So what we do is we try to identify those particular needs for our clients. Sometimes our clients just come to us and ask us, well, we understand that you do grants management. We do more than that. We have to figure out where those particular gaps lie in the funding streams. And then what we do is we go to that next step. We have to identify where we can actually go out there and find the money. So we will start to mine the different sources. Remember, it's not only the infrastructure bill that a lot of people are playing with right now, it's also ARPA money, leftover COVID money. And you could see that a lot of, I used to, focus on FEMA funding, FEMA reimbursement. I call myself a grants manager now, just for the fact that there are so many different avenues in order to grasp opportunities out there that we have to be much more aware than just FEMA funding or HUD funding that's out there. And then what we do is we want to make sure that we can actually do a benefit cost analysis. So we identify the need, we identify those shovel-ready projects, and we have to do the benefit cost analysis. Now, I know that I've had numerous conversations in the past few months on how to actually do that. I am familiar with the FEMA model of benefit cost analysis, which is, it does not necessarily hit all of the right areas, especially in those underserved communities, in order to make sure that you're getting the right project in the right area. So what we've done is we try to do the benefit cost analysis for all of these opportunities. And then we focus on what is the return on investment? This is where if you take $1 here and you spend it, what is the investment you're going to make at the end of the day? So we'll do the BCAs. We'll also do return on investment strategies. And then we come up with that eligibility requirements. And we're making sure that these projects fit against the actual grants that are out there. We've dumped this all into our funnel, as we like to say, and then we go out there and we mine where the opportunities could lie for an individual client. We are trying with everybody to say that not only do you have to be aware of the grant funding and making sure you're meeting those performance matrix, you are also trying to change the culture. You're trying to make a more resilient client, as I like to say, because the more that the client can actually look and capture all of these funding streams, the more resilient they're going to be going forward. I can tell you in 2017, personally, after the wildfires in California, I was out next to the desk of a city administrator who had lost 5,000 homes the night before in a massive fire that hit his particular city. And in turn, we were waiting on the call, and the call came. Where did the call come from? The bonding companies that held bonds for that city, saying, hey, are you going to be able to meet the requirements of the bond? We just need to understand how are you going to bounce back from this fire? So in turn, overnight, we were trying to figure out how much has been lost out of the budget streams, his annual budget, and how much we're going to need to make up. So we started looking at numerous areas to try to make up that particular gap in funding. He lost 12% of his annual budget that night based on the tax base that was lost. So at that point, we didn't have many options. We had FEMA funding, there was HUD funding that we knew was coming, but the infrastructure bill, the ARPA bill, COVID, now all adds into that and making our clients more resilient as they're going forward. So this slide, we talk about that resiliency, and we're making sure that people are looking at it from 3 different avenues, right? Prior to the event, right? Before the event happens, how are you going to be financially resilient? And making sure that your particular infrastructure is up to snuff, and is there any money out there that can help with making your infrastructure more resilient going forward? Where are those gaps? During the event, being resourceful and understanding that during a disaster, you can pull from different funding streams, but making sure that the documentation is going to be correct as well going forward. And then after the event, when you're actually trying to make certain that you're getting, you're having rapid recovery, and that you're actually making sure that you're pushing through as it pertains to backing up all of that recovery and the loss that was occurred during that time frame. So we're trying to do it in twofold: look for the grant funding and also making more resilient communities going forward, because a lot of this focus is on that climate change model too in the infrastructure bill. You see that theme throughout it. Some of the successes we've had in regards to current clients that we have. We actually have the honor of working for the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. Being from New Jersey, I say the Port of New Jersey and New York, but they don't think that that's funny when I go up there and talk to them. But in turn, we've been working with them for 6 years. A lot of it is Hurricane Sandy and getting the reimbursements in for that. But we have actually gone further. They've actually asked us to take on, looking at that infrastructure bill, seeing what else we can get them. And we're currently pursuing over $866 million for them in additional funding through all of these avenues of all of this additional grant funding coming in. Recently, I have assisted a grain company out in Kansas, which actually wanted to build a soybean crushing facility in Southeast Kansas. In Southeast Kansas, the annual average income from the farmer down there that does soybeans is about $21,000 a year. The 80 million was not to build the soybean manufacturing plant. It was in order to give that particular company the assistance that they would need in order to pay a higher price per bushel for the soybeans coming in over a 10-year lifespan of that particular facility, so that it would inject money into that underserved community going forward. Again, this was an extremely advanced project. They were going to take the soybean and convert it into biodiesel, and it was going to be a 1-to-1 conversion for biodiesel. So very forward thinking. It had that climate change in there, which obviously the Department of Agriculture wants to hear. And it also had, how is it going to raise up that underserved community in Southeast Kansas? We also are currently working with electrical utilities in Texas, where they've asked us to come in and look at all of their Department of Energy grants that they are currently pursuing, but also go through that funnel process like I showed you earlier. So we just started it, and we're currently identifying their current funding gaps and their needs, and actually starting to mine the infrastructure bill for opportunities there. Another interesting example, we're assisting a state level recycling agency where they need to now itemize the sorting that they're doing on the recyclables. And in turn, we have a private sector company that actually has the robotics in order to do that sorting for them and to give them actual daily counts on the recyclables. So in turn, they came to us and said, well, how can this be a win-win for both the private sector company and selling that robotics to that state level agency? And how could the state actually look and actually purchase their particular product? So we actually have found a particular grant that will allow the state agency to apply for funding to actually get this particular product in so that they can sort recyclables and understand where the inflow of recyclables are coming from, understand what communities on what days when they're processing are actually not recycling as other communities are doing. And then we're enhancing that further by looking at the infrastructure bill, because there's also education grants out there where the particular state agency can actually ask for a grant to educate those particular communities that are not recycling everything to the maximum extent that they can, and actually bring up that current flow of recyclables into the plant. So we're able to work a lot of angles, both on the private sector side and on the public sector side regarding these particular clients. Another one that just came up, which we did an orals presentation for just last week for the city of Norfolk, they're getting in over $1.4 trillion in order to do a coastal restoration project in the city. And they came to us and said, is there any way of finding dollars for us in the infrastructure bill that can help us do cost share? So now we even have a different angle on the infrastructure money. Can it be used for handling the cost share for other federal programs? And you're seeing that availability now in the infrastructure bill for those types of funding streams as well, to be used as that cost sharing model. Just recently, in maybe the past 8 years, HUD and FEMA came up with a model there where you can use HUD dollars to do the cost share for your FEMA reimbursement. So now that model is taken on too within the infrastructure bill. And so we're looking at advancing that going forward as well. So with that, I'll bump it back to John and any questions that we may want to take.
I was trying to write some of the notes there, Steve, that you provided in that discussion. The match and the coordination with, I mean, even the BRIC grants for that matter, would be unbelievable to be able to help integrate several of these different projects together and come up with something innovative across that way. Stephen Meredith, I'm going to put you on the spot here, and I kind of know the answer. It's a little more complicated, but in my simple little black and white world, I like it to at least be asked. So if I had your agriculture, your recycling, let's pretend it's your recycling project, and I've worked with the state and I've worked with that department within the state, and we came up with a, I don't know, $10 million project that we have an idea on, and we want to put it forward for the Infrastructure Act. Where would I go? Where, is there one spot that I would go to send my application to, or what would be the process that I would have to go through to figure out the right organization to use the right Infrastructure Act money that I would want to deal with?
And great question, John, and thank you for that. It varies, because what we're doing is we're playing grants off of other grants right now. So we will actually, I go in and I just use the legislation, the infrastructure legislation is out there, and we have keyword search terms, and we'll actually start mining the number of grants available for that particular activity, be it that $10 million project, and we start understanding where the money is. That is only the first step, because the next step that you have to do is understand the actual performance matrix against that particular grant, and also what you need to meet in the requirements. Some will allow you to actually go after both and share the money. Other particular grants will not allow you to do that because you will conflict yourself out of other grants. So it just varies accordingly. So we will actually then create an Excel list of all of the available grants against the federal agencies. And in turn, what we will then do is look at the requirements of each. And we have a very complex requirements matrix that we have set up that allows us to pull the requirements of each and do that comparative model, and saying what it will then be the best from a financial standpoint, how can we best assist this client, and what are the grants we need to focus on?
And so I actually just put in the chat to the whole group, to all the attendees, a link, sort of building off of what Steve mentioned. We've got a matrix that we use internally. The link I just provided is an excessive amount of rows in Excel, but it provides all the new and existing programs that are going to be receiving money in the bill. So I think it's something around 3,000 rows in Excel, and sifting through that all to figure out what programs do you qualify for, what are you eligible for, what are the application terms, how long, is it a grant, is it a loan? You can sift through that file and figure out what you may or may not apply for. But as Steve mentioned, taking it then that next step further to figure out how can we really maximize when we're combining funding sources, because that's really at the end of the day what the client gets the best value out of that.
And just to let you know that, and I know Mr. Darnell is on the phone, and glad to see you, Daryl. But when I actually worked for DC government, my background is actually the state administrating agent for the National Capital Region. So after 9/11, there was a tremendous amount of money that came in, and I worked with people like Daryl in order to understand how we actually take all of those funding streams, distribute it out to the actual counties within DC, Virginia, and Maryland, and making certain, though, that it met the requirements of the grant dollars. And those grant dollars at that time were all being defined after 9/11, and we took a very conservative approach to that. So we have a significant amount of background, even going back to 9/11, where all of that money and how to interpret it the right way and create the right guidelines going forward.
So Meredith, the spreadsheet that you spoke about there with the 3,000 lines or whatever is on there. Yeah, you can kind of check the Google sites and stuff and see, hey, Florida received, I don't know, 2.3 billion or whatever the magic. Would one of those be a row on your 3,000 sheet? Would that show up?
There's a map that shows all
There's a
that
map.
that you're mentioning, John, yes, and that map is very helpful. Again, I'm a visual person, so that
Yeah.
map is very helpful. This spreadsheet actually breaks it down by agency. So there's, FAA, EPA, et cetera, and then within that, what programs does that federal agency have? Is it energy efficient buses, and it may say the applicants that are only available to apply are public schools, which, that could disqualify a lot of candidates, but there's money there for public schools. So, they should be able to take advantage of that. So that this spreadsheet there's a lot of data in there, but it breaks it down per agency, per program. And to be honest, some of the rows, because they're new programs that federal agencies are creating, they don't have the terms and conditions yet. They don't have the duration. They don't have the eligibility requirements defined yet, because that's still getting determined on a federal level. So some of the cells still say TBD, as the government's trying to figure out, okay, we've got this money, who does it go to? What are the terms and conditions? So they're still trying to figure some of that out right now themselves, but this really helps break it down on a very, very granular level.
So when they break it down, is it broken down by organization? Like, here's the Department of Energy, here's the Department of Transportation, here's the Department of Education, whatever it happens to be, those different groups. And then they begin to siphon that down to the states. Is kind of the process that's going on right now?
It depends upon the grant, John. Some of them will go direct to the state, and then the state has to then put it out for the localities in order for them to apply up to the state, back up to the federal agency. There are other funding streams, though, that they have taken the state out of that, and they're going directly to that actual locality. So there's been a rub in the past of, well, the state's taking too much administrative dollars off the top. They're misspending those dollars. So there has been other funding streams that have been put out there that are going direct to the locality based on the projects that they're presenting. So it varies across the table.
So when you kind of move it from one, bear with my confusion here, Steve. I'm just trying to figure it out. You have a grant, you have the act, that's the Infrastructure Act, but that you siphon that, you're kind of saying it siphons off into different grants that have different rules with different mechanisms. So it's just not the Infrastructure Act grant that you're going to apply to. It could be 50 other grants that they have siphoned off the Infrastructure Act money into various other types of grants.
Absolutely. And a lot of what's happening now, there's also an additional layer. And that additional layer now is actually the Department of Treasury, which is lying over the top of all of the money as well. So, you may have gone direct, from FEMA down to the state, down to the locality. While in some instances now you have Treasury down to the federal agency, down to the state, down to the locality. So there's additional layers, and at some points there are ones that are going direct right to the locality.
Okay, so there is some money that is not, that everyone cannot just go after, and there are certainly more flexible types of mechanisms that may be the case, and people are just going to have to do their homework
Yes.
to start verifying those 3,000 lines or whatever they're interested in, and start siphoning those off, and in figuring out the details within each of those different areas, the different sectors that they're dealing with, whether it's energy, transportation, whatever else they're working through, cybersecurity or whatever else. However, there's the divvying that money up, and then there are and then there's the state side of how they move that down to, maybe even the state and that individual department, or that even that locality. Are they even divvying that up to the locality level as well?
Absolutely. So you have for example, you may have an emergency manager that's looking to pursue numerous grant opportunities. The problem that localities or individual departments are having right now is that you have to actually look at the compliance matrix for each individual grant. You have to deconflict them. You have to see where you could share money. You have to see where you overlap in performance matrix and where you can get hung up in particular OIG audits and things of that nature. So that's what we're trying to specialize in. And we're finding out that people don't have the capacity at the agency level and the local level and even the state level in order to do that analysis. So we're now offering up that function for them in order to, again, figure out that need, understand the projects, and get them funded for a better and more resilient community going forward.
Okay, and bear with me, I don't know this term, so forgive my ignorance here, Wendy, but there's a question here comes up. Where are the NOFOs generally published, and what are the general timelines?
So the NOFOs, notice of funding opportunity.
Oh, simple enough, okay.
So on those, again, grants.gov is a great avenue to get a lot of the tracking of all of the different grants that are being offered. What we're doing, we're using grants.gov, but we're also using some other tools in order to help us. A lot of this is being put out in the Federal Register notices on a daily basis of when dollars are going to be released and the programs associated with it. That is another tool you could use because you can actually put in the actual agencies you want to review on a daily basis. We also use GovWind. We also have another tool that we bought called Fiscal Note. These are tracking these various funding streams as they're coming down through the various avenues so we could see where it's coming from. We saw a lot of movement out of the gate with EPA was the first agency that I think embraced these dollars and started pushing it out for clean water, especially on the infrastructure where you got heavy lead in the pipes. So they were able to push that money out very quickly right out of the gate. There are others that are holding the money right now. And I would say one of the things that you have to be aware of is because there's been a flip in the House politically, that there also are particular committees staging up to actually slow the funding stream down from being put out into the federal agency's hands. So there's a lot going on with the movement of the dollars. So it's not just tracking it using all these tools, it's also understanding how it could be hung up and not moving forward.
And I think you've said this before, and I just wanted to make sure and clarify the question. You may not, in grants.gov, you may not, if you do a search on the Infrastructure Act, you may not see all the grants that are associated with the infrastructure grant because they may be buried inside another particular grant. So you may not have a clue that that's infrastructure dollars as you're looking at the opportunities within grants.gov. Is that? I mean,
absolutely, because again, it's new programs and it's also pre-existing programs. So some of these programs have gotten a huge boost in funding, and they may be something that you've already gone after in the past. All of a sudden now, instead of having 100 million there's 200 million or 300 million being pumped into that particular area. As you know, you just went through BRIC. There's a tremendous amount of money being pushed through the BRIC program now. And in turn, a lot of that money was coming from the infrastructure bill and put into FEMA. Okay.
And the requirements here to focus on LMI or underserved communities, I mean, again, that's based on the particular grant. So if that infrastructure dollars gets pushed into the BRIC arena, I mean, we know just from the previous presentation that you're going to have to integrate underserved communities within that performance matrix that's going to be scored.
Yes, but I would also say, and you know, obviously we can go on and have a whole nother session regarding BCA calculations with FEMA, but I won't get into that discussion. But there are certain themes according to the infrastructure bill, and making sure it actually reaches those underserved communities is one of those themes. Another one is climate change. The third one is resiliency. These are the three pillars that really buttress up the infrastructure bill in many ways for a lot of these particular grants.
I can elaborate on an example of that LMI, underserved communities piece of the bill. There's a program that's providing money to ports, all across our seaboards to be able to have electric vehicles, electric fleets, EV charging stations. However, if the ports get this money for EV charging, they are required to put the chargers in a place that is publicly accessible, so that folks in surrounding communities can use these EV chargers. Obviously, some ports are secure areas that are bringing in goods and services for the United States, so you can't have regular civilians just driving onto port property. So, that's just an example of one of the challenges and sometimes limitations in the funding is that, yes, ports, you can have money here for electric charging in vehicles. Oh, but by the way, if you install an EV charger, the public has to be able to use it. So they're trying to, you have to kind of really dig into the weeds to figure out, okay, does this make sense for the port? Does the port want this money and they're going to put it outside their secured fence or not? Is there money they can use to put the EV chargers inside their secured fence for their own internal fleets of vehicles? So that's just one example of, the money is tagged there so that underserved communities and surrounding LMI can, take advantage of this money and the funding, but, is that what the port's looking for? And kind of trying to find the happy medium between the two.
Meredith, and maybe you have sent this, and I was busy trying to see some of the other questions and stuff. But is there a good link or links for this site that people can go to for some of this information?
Yeah, I posted it. I can re-drop it in the chat. I think it's whitehouse.gov/build. And then about 3/4 down the page, it says download the guidebook data set. And when you click on that link, the massive spreadsheet will download onto your computer.
Very good.
But
Okay.
I'll repost that website in the chat.
Yeah, that would be helpful, and then that would get documented in the presentation.
Yep, of course.
I'm trying to see if I missed anything. Some of these are mixed in with the with the Infrastructure Act, so it's a little hard for me to try to see because some of them are, they're overlapping. I mean, that's part of the issue and part of the confusion factor that I think we're dealing with. And I think that was a brick one. People were struggling trying to get, mitigation funds. And it's very similar, Steve, to, I think we talked before, if we're dealing with a non-disadvantaged area and trying to struggle is, brick seems to be a tough way to go to get scoring.
Yes.
If you're not dealing in the disadvantaged area there. Are there better avenues, within the infrastructure bill that people could utilize within that and different, other mechanisms that they could go through that you would suggest? I don't know. I'm throwing that out there as, I don't, what's your recommendation for submitting a competitive app for a community that's not?
I always present the formula that a good application is 50% documentation regarding your need for the dollars, and the other 50% is political. We work to do a side-by-side analysis. We identify where that particular client is located. We understand the House reps and the Senate reps and the congressional reps in those areas. We actually develop templates in order to help those clients go to those representatives and have them actually support the actual project. And with that, we add that onto the grants to make certain that people understand that when you do that, you're showing the endorsement of your local representatives in this process. and you have to cover that political side of the house. If you don't, we believe that you would be at risk of potential funding. So the more support you can get, the better off you're going to be. For the one that I was telling you in Southeast Kansas, we had 12 letters of support for that. Everything from the local county official all the way on up to the senator or the senators in that particular state, making certain that they were supporting this particular project. And then what we did is we enhanced that even further, and we walked the client through the process of making certain that not only they were doing the communication with those staffers, but how they were actually going to enhance the political nature of that particular opportunity in that location and the why behind it.
Steve, I'll let you deal with this hardball. I tried dealing with some of the softballs and stuff for a very complicated project here. Spurgeon basically asked, what would you suggest a new recipient? He almost sounds like he's already received the funds, if I'm reading this correctly. What would you suggest a new recipient or new grantees start doing or begin preparing today to maximize their potential use of these infrastructure funds?
So what we had, and that's Mr. Robinson there creating that one. So thank you, Spurgeon.
I see. He was just anticipating. That's what he did.
Yeah.
Smart guy.
Yeah. So we actually make sure that we tell our clients be aware of those shovel-ready projects. The better your project is ready when once you get those dollars in, you can put that shovel in the ground and you can hit the ground running with that project, always will make for a better application. So looking at your community, understanding the community's vulnerabilities, understanding the projects that you will need in order to basically shore up the resiliency of the community and decrease the vulnerability in the area, and that you already have a design on it. So some of these projects, they're asking for those design builds. So making sure you're reaching out to those engineering firms, getting the design ready so that you can hit the ground running if it is an infrastructure related opportunity. That's how we look at it. We start with those and then we work it from there.
Yes, Spurgeon, my wife has all that all set up as soon as I bring those lottery tickets back home every day. So she has that list all set up there, ready to go. Anyways, with this, I mean, local face, what challenges to states and locals face to do this? I assume that that means to handle this funding, to handle, I mean, are they ready for this? You know, when Florida receives their 2.3 billion or whatever, I mean, are they set to go, and are they ready to start receiving, applications right now?
So what we've seen at some of the state levels, the state, after the infrastructure bill hit the street, it was recommended that the states actually dove somebody as the infrastructure bill czar for the state, right? What that individual needed to make certain that they were linked into all of the agencies that the governor wanted to have oversight on for these dollars. We see a lot within the economic development type departments. If there is now resiliency departments at the state level, they are all, you have to make sure you coordinate with all of them so that you're pushing forward and it's a combined effort rather than each agency applying separately for the same pot of funds. So one of the things is that coordination needs to occur at that state level, and it also needs to occur at a regional level too. I worked in the National Capital Region, for over 15 years. And in turn, we always went to the Council of Government in order to help us with that coordinated process, because they already had those actual mechanisms to do that coordination. So it really is that coordination is key in order to make sure that you don't have multiple counties multiple departments at the state level going after the same funding streams and putting yourself at a disadvantage.
I'd add to that with another challenge as well, Stephen, you mentioned this a little bit earlier, is once the client's state, whatever entity gets the funding, it's then tracking and being on top of for auditing purposes. Because at the end of the day, this is federal money and there's a lot of recipients who may have not had federal grants before. So they need to be aware of that going into it to make sure that 5, 6, 7 years down the line, when OIG may come to check your documentation, your record keeping, you've met all your requirements.
Yeah.
So auditing, and then also I just think staffing in general. I think, what was it, Steve? It was either the EPA or DOE. I think it was DOE that they've created an entire new office within their
Yes,
agency.
Department of Energy did. Yeah.
Yeah, a new department basically as a result of IIJA and new money and new opportunities. So they're trying to staff, and I know industry-wide staffing and resources is a limited resource at the moment. But I know federal, state, local, trying to hire more folks has been a challenge as well.
So I think you're trying to answer the question, Meredith. Help me. Stephen Boyle asked an interesting question. And I think certainly the states and the locals understand the concept with the UASIs and with Shishkip and all these different types of entities that that they bring in employees because of these grants coming in. And Stephen, if I missed your question, I apologize. But does the program offer employment with people within some of these organizations or with these efforts?
So if I'm understanding the question correctly, every grant comes with an administrative percentage. So some grants are 5%. The highest administrative percentage you can take out of any one grant is 10% off the top of the grant in order to help manage the grant. That usually means employment. So you can add individual jobs in order to help manage those particular dollars at the recipient or the subrecipient level. So you can actually garner and gain more people by looking at that percentage take off the top.
Okay. And I assume you could add, I don't know, for a hazard vulnerability assessment, and let's pretend it's $1 million and you don't have the people inside and you handle contractors to do that work. I mean, that's all game within.
Yes, it is. Yes, that is allowable. Yeah.
I'm not seeing any other questions at this point. Steve, Meredith, I'll let you have the last word on this, but I got to tell you, I can't say enough. This was probably as complicated as we could, deal with the subject area on something that is probably just getting off the ground at this point, which I think, and I appreciate that. And so, next year when we have all the actual processes in place and the circles and arrows, the nice and neat, and everybody can understand them. But I think that's part of the issue at this point in time. I mean, there's got to be some research. There's got to be some relationships. There has to be some understanding at the federal level as well as at the states level of how these funding is being coordinated to be able to utilize this within your state, within your facility, within your area, within your academia perspective, your industry perspective. I mean, everything along that line would have to be, I think, like you said before, I think relationships that have to be formed almost before the writing begins, if I'm understanding you correctly.
Yep, long before, if you can get out ahead of it, absolutely. And it's going to be constant. A lot of this money, like John was saying in the beginning, it usually comes with a 6-year time frame. And in regards to the spend, and the way that they're breaking out the funds is that they're spreading it across the 6 years. So if it is a $60 million grant, they're doing 10 million a year. So they're putting it out that way. And also on some of these, you can reapply to get additional dollars as you go along with the same project. So that's yet another area of complication to all of this as well. So the spending of the money is throughout that time frame. You have more time in order to then making certain that you have the right documentation on the back end, that you do all of the justifications and so forth. But it's 6 years, and I'm saying to all of my clients, let's start here and let's look out for 20 years, right? Don't just stop at 6 years, because there may be another funding stream coming down the pike. And like I started the conversation, I no longer call myself a FEMA grants guy, right? I'm a grants manager. And the reason why is that there are so many different funding streams available out there. It's not going to stop at the infrastructure bill. This is going to be the new way of managing projects and managing funding streams going forward.
Meredith, any last words here?
No, I think Steve hit it on the head. And as you mentioned, the bill's been around for about 2 years now, but we're still learning new things every day. New information's getting published and announced. And, someone mentioned the question with the NOFOs. So as we continue to get more information, it just continues to evolve, and we all learn to go with it and figure it out.
Well, thank you for your time. That was fantastic. I certainly, it was helpful to me. I know that. And I certainly have a much better perspective, even though I may not like all those answers. I liked it just to be nice and simple, and here's where you go, but it's a little more complicated than that, which I can appreciate. And but thank you for your time, Steve and Meredith. Great seeing you again, Steve and Meredith. Appreciate your help with this. Laura, I'm going to turn it back over to you and your team, and move it forward here as we move through track 2.
Great. Thank you, John. Thank you, Steve and Meredith. What a great panel. It made me feel better, because we certainly walk up to the IIJA and the massive spreadsheets, and there's a lot of information coming at us from all different angles. It's good information, but I think you guys gave a lot of really helpful tips about how to try and focus and manage it and accept the good news, which is that these partnerships and this kind of creative thinking, it's here to stay.